Good afternoon, everyone. I've been given the green light to start, so I can't see anyone, and I don't know how many people are here. So hopefully you can all hear me, and I'm just going to stay on your screen for a little bit while I do the introductions, and then I'll come off, and this means you can concentrate on the slideshow. So first of all, thank you to the IIRSM for inviting me to come and talk. My name is Ross Cady. I am the Senior Mountain Safety Advisor for Mountaineering Scotland. But I'm also the team leader of IIRSM Mountain Rescue Team, which is a mountain rescue team in the west coast of Scotland. So during this talk, I'm kind of wearing two hats, kind of representing Mountaineering Scotland. I'll be kind of talking about sort of mountain rescue generally, and also representing a little bit about Scottish Mountain Rescue, which is a kind of membership organisation. So I'm going to take myself off the screen and just do the slideshow. Okay. So what I'm going to cover is how mountain rescue works in Scotland. So if there's people listening from England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, or anywhere else, this is very much about Scotland. What does the data tell us? So I'm going to present some information, some data from the Scottish Mountain Rescue Organisation, and some pros and cons about that, but also about fatalities in the mountains, which is collected in a slightly different way, and look at the things it tells us there. And then finally summarizing and kind of discussing a little bit about the rules and the regulations in the mountains, what there is, kind of what we might get called for, and what there is in your kind of workspaces, which I've watched some of the other videos on YouTube from the IIRSM, and there's some really interesting things. So I know some people here will know quite a lot about what happened in their workplace with regulations and why that might be quite different to the mountains. So first of all, just to outline how mountain rescue works in the mountains. So the police in Scotland and in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, police are ultimately responsible for rescuing and searching for anyone in the across land. So on the sea, it's the Coast Guard, and on land, it is the police. And any mountain rescue kind of takes this into consideration. So it's the police that call us out, and we work in a way, we volunteer to work under the police, and they retain ownership of any incident. So in a way, mountain rescue work underneath the police, and the police can also bring in other assets like the military and helicopters. If you ever do get stuck, I suppose I should do this just to make sure, if you're ever in the mountains, the best way, the main way of calling mountain rescue is you call the police, and when you ask the police when you phone 999, and then you ask for mountain rescue, and it's the police that coordinate that. And mountain rescue might call you on your phone, or you might not hear from them, but it will be the police you ask for, then mountain rescue. And you can do that on 999 or 112 in the UK. So how that might look. So here we are on the top left. We've got someone having a bit of a mountain kind of adventure, and then maybe the cloud clags in and they have to navigate and something happens. This is just an example. So maybe they get lost, or maybe they twist their ankle, and they would phone 999. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the police control room. So you'd speak to not the police control room, so the 999 control room, the emergency service control room, and you'd ask for the police, and they start taking details and things, and they would go, okay, this is a mountain rescue incident, so I'm going to send it on to the police. And then there'd be a police incident controller, and they will decide what they need to do, and they will probably set up an incident log, and that incident log uses what we call the SARCall platform. And this was created by I think it was created by some people down in England, Mountain Rescue, some volunteers there, and it's kind of grown arms and legs and gets used by most of the emergency services. And they will then send out a text message, hopefully, to the person who called. So the person in the yellow jacket there might have used their phone, and the police will send out a message, a text message. And in that text message, it basically says, if you want to be located, help the police out, and click this link. And by clicking that link, what it does is it switches on the GPS in your smartphone, assuming you've got a smartphone. And if you've got a signal, it will send a grid reference, so your location, and it will plug it into the computer system. So that's pretty phenomenal. Yeah. So that's how that works, just as an overview. And then what happens is the police will hand that over or ask for mountain rescue. So there's a picture of someone in a control room, and this is a volunteer in a mountain rescue team. And the platform, as you can see on the left-hand side of the computer screen, this allows them to send out a message, a text message to all the mountain rescue team in their team. They could also request for other mountain rescue teams. They can request other support from other assets like helicopters and dog teams. And on the screen on the right, by pressing that link on that phone for the phone find, there should appear a little dot on the map, and that will show you your location. So within seconds of pressing that link in the control room for mountain rescue and in the police control room, it'll show you your location. So it's absolutely brilliant. But that does rely on you having phone signal, your own network, and also relies on you having GPS on your phone. So an old-fashioned phone won't be able to do that, but that would be the perfect world. And then that's not my mountain rescue team, so I've just put another thing over the top, which is my mountain rescue team picture. When I've been in the control room, I've added some extra chocolate biscuits because I'm often not on the hill these days as team leader, often controlling it. So I eat a lot of chocolate to keep me going. But you can also see on the map on the screen, there's lots of blue lines and kind of rectangles. Those rectangles are, once people are deployed in the mountain rescue team members, our VHF radios now show the location, GPS location of these radios, i.e. where the people are. So I can keep track of the team members on there. And that's an actual live call out we had on Ben Marnane, which is kind of just near Loch Lomond, just to the west side of Loch Lomond. So you can keep track of actual real time where people are, which is amazing. So assuming I've hit the button to say, right, this incident needs the full team, then team members need to actually leave their work, they need to leave their family, they need to shopping and things, they need to get themselves to the post, so they need to drive themselves to the mountain rescue post, they need to get changed, we need to brief, we need to come up with a plan and brief each other, we need to get into the vehicles and drive towards the mountain. So some of the mountains are quite local to where we all live, others are a bit further away. There might be a half an hour, even 45 minutes to an hour drive to the mountain. So people often press the big red button and call mountain rescue and expect instant rescuing, but that's really not the case. It can take several hours sometimes just to get deployed. On nice weather, when we've got a helicopter available from the Coast Guard helicopters, we get picked up and taken up, which is a really nice treat. So we don't have to do much walking. Cuts down the time quite quickly. So this is our team waiting to be picked up. Other times, more often than not, we have to actually walk up the mountain to get to the people. And sometimes that's a bit of a shock to people because it took them maybe 2 hours to get there to where they've had their accident or need help. And then again, they're wanting us to go and help them as quickly as possible. But they sometimes forget that it's going to take us the same amount of time to walk into where they are. That's after we've done all the things I've mentioned before about getting there and getting changed and coming up with a plan. So the conditions are often not so very pleasant, like the last photos. It can be dark, it can be wet, it can be snowing. And then we obviously deal with the situations that comes. And this is a photo at nighttime. This is a real life rescue. Just the difficulty of steep ground, the difficulty of rain and darkness. And we were evacuating the stretcher. You can see the stretcher getting headlights and stuff. So it could take quite a while. So once we've got to them, it then is going to take several hours to get down unless there's a helicopter involved. So a bit more about general mountain rescue. There's 23 civilian mountain rescue teams, and they're all volunteers. So they are totally 100% volunteer teams. Everyone in them are doing that because they want to. I think that's quite important to kind of mention, that no one's getting paid for it. There are 3 police teams. So they are professional teams because the police are ultimately responsible. So they are volunteers within the police. So although they're working, they don't have to be in the mountain rescue team with the police, but it is during work time. So they're under kind of working regulations. There are two search dog teams, so SARDA search teams, and this is in Scotland, just a reminder. There's an aerial organisation, they deal with drones and drone searching, and then there's a cave rescue team as well that do underground things, and most mountain rescue teams want to avoid going underground. So that's what we've got there. All mountain rescue teams are made up of people, and across Scotland, there's more than 900 volunteers from all walks of life. Kind of estate workers, teachers, engineers, medical, there's retired folk, there's business owners, scientists, pilots, outdoor instructors. Basically, think of a job and there's people who are willing to do that. Because we're volunteers, we are available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, but only when we are able to do it. So if I'm at a party and I've had a few beers and we get a call out, I personally won't be going because I can't drive to get there or whatever. Or if I'm at work, for instance, if we get a call out right this minute, I can't just up and go. So we can have anything from 5 or 6 people going, or sort of we've got about 30 people in the team, so we can have all 30 people turn up, and we won't know until we press that button and find out who's coming. A little bit more on that later. But some statistics from Scottish Mountain Rescue, the organisation, is in 2022, there were 843 call-outs, and there was 29,804 hours spent on those call-outs, and 85,000 hours in training. That's a total of 114,804 hours just on training and call-outs. That doesn't include kit checks, running the charity, meetings, fundraising, and all those things. That's just for training and rescuing people. So it's a huge amount of hours, and that's across the whole of Scotland, but just for the people, the organisations for Scottish Mountain Rescue. And I'll explain a little bit about that in more detail. So those numbers will definitely be bigger. So this is the drones, some nice pictures of drones. So drones are kind of the new kid on the block. They're getting used more and more. They definitely have their advantages. You don't have to walk quite so high up the mountain. They can visually access things that might be a bit trickier. So gorges and things like that, you can search from a higher viewpoint. Some of them have got thermal imaging on them now, and they've got spotlights on them. But they do have their limitations. So strong winds, a lot of them can't fly in rain or only a little bit of rain. And obviously, if you do find the person you're searching for, that's the first half of it, but you've still got to walk up there and rescue them. So if they've got a broken leg, you need to carry things, go and rescue them. Or if they don't know where they are, you still need to walk them off the mountain. So they're definitely limited, but they're getting more capable. We've got dogs. Everyone likes the dogs. It's a great fundraiser. If you rescue a dog or dogs are involved in rescue, you can be sure that you're going to get lots of kind of people giving you money, which is really nice to support you. Really good on social media when you put pictures of dogs on. So they're really good at sniffing out and searching. And they search air scent, not ground scent. There's 2 different ways of training them. I'm not a dog expert, but they do scent through the air. So if you're sitting on the mountains, they have to know which way the wind's going, and they'll search there. They can do large areas, which is quite useful, but they're also very, very useful in avalanches, obviously scent through the snow. And Mountain Rescue also work with other agencies. So obviously we mentioned the police. We're working on behalf of the police. I've mentioned the Coast Guard helicopters. So they're very useful. We like it when helicopters get involved, but again, they can only fly under certain circumstances. The ambulance service, we work with them, fire and rescue, flood agencies and resilience, cave and mine rescue we mentioned, and the Royal Air Force. So the Royal Air Force have their own mountain rescue teams as well, which we can work alongside with, and we can ask for assistance from them. So there's a little bit of detail about when I talk about the statistics later on, and that is to do with the statistics coming from an organisation called Scottish Mountain Rescue. And it was formed in 1965, and it was then called the Mountain Rescue Committee of Scotland, the MRC of S. and it's a representative and coordinating body for members of mountain rescue teams in Scotland. Mountain rescue teams individually are their own charities, they're their own organisations, they run themselves independently, and they choose or not to be part of the wider organisation of Scottish Mountain Rescue. They don't have to be part of that, and there's actually 3 civilian teams that aren't part of that, and they've chosen not to be. So when we talk about the statistics, this is coming from Scottish Mountain Rescue, so we just need to be aware that not all the numbers are included in this. There are 3 teams not included. But Scottish Mountain Rescue, the organisation, is a registered charity, and all the other mountain rescue teams are registered charities in their own right. So looking at the stats, as I said before, it is data collected from 25 teams. That includes the police and the RAF and the mine rescue, but doesn't include 3 teams. And there's data going back to 2001, but the main stuff on the website, you can visit the SMR website, Scottish Mountain Rescue website, and it goes back to 2011. It's all in public domain. And there's also going to be reference to some statistics that I collect as part of my role in Mountaineering Scotland, which is the representative body for hill walkers, climbers, and skiers. And this is going back from to 2013 to 2023. So we'll talk about those as well. So how SMR stats are collected. The team leader input after a shout, they put in the information onto a special website type thing, portal, if you like. And it's only really 1 or 2 people in each team that can do that. And obviously that has its own challenges, because there are call-outs where, as a team leader myself, I might not be involved with it. So Arica Mountain Rescue Team were called out last night or yesterday afternoon, and I wasn't there because I was working, so I wasn't able to go. So I will fill in that data, but I need to ask the people that were on the shout what happened and the details of location, things like that. So there is a bit of a problem with who's putting that information in and how much information that is. And we just need to be careful when we're looking at the data that there's obviously a lag. So sometimes I'm quite good at putting it in and I can put it in on the day or the day after. Some people and some teams sometimes wait until the end of the year and they put it all in at the end of the year, which means there might be some information missing or information forgotten about or not collected. So we do need to be just treat it with a sort of a bit of caution. Obviously, fatalities can pose particular challenges because of data protection. So this is the SMR stats. Again, this is just for the teams that are associated with Scottish Mountain Rescue, the organisation. And you can see there's a slight upward trend. I did ask the statistician why some years it peaks and some years it troughs, and she couldn't tell me. But that's it. So there's a question later. If you look at the red line, that's the number of call-outs. As you can see, it's slowly increasing. And then in 2021, you can see that there's a big spike, but that's because Tayside Mountain Rescue Team, which is one of the, were 4 groups, 4 mountain rescue teams that left. Tayside rejoined in 2021, so that's that big spike there. And this is for call-outs, which is a bit different to mountain rescue call-outs. So this is non-mountaineering related incidents as well. And this is just for mountaineering incidents. So of those sort of 700, so if I go back a little bit, yeah, that's peaking there at 700 incidents. But this is just mountaineering incidents. So things like hill walking, climbing, and mountaineering, ski touring and things. It doesn't include sort of the resilient side. So a lot of mountain rescue teams get called out to flood things, helping local communities, searching kind of more rural areas for vulnerable people and things. So For looking at this now, we're going to move just to the things that happen on mountains that involve people who have purposely gone out to the hills for their adventures, be that hill walking or climbing, in summer or winter, and they get into difficulties. So the numbers are much lower, as you can see, it's about 350. So about half the number of people that we get called out to are actually to do with mountaineering as we would think about it. So the proportion of winter hill walking related incidents is slightly increasing, but you can see that the majority of it is summer hill walking. It's not rock climbing, it's not scrambling, it's not technical things. The majority of people are just hill walking in summer, and then there's another increase in hill walking in winter. So it's the kind of the non-technical stuff. And if we look at the ground, where they are when it's happening, you can see that most of it's happening just people slipping and tripping and falling over, rather than kind of what we see in the media, which is, oh, people are falling off mountains and being really silly. It's most people are just kind of happily walking along and they're just slipping over on the path quite often, and they can have just twist their ankles. And there's a few things there. So this is from the SMR statistician Jess. Compared to earlier years, the tendency to slip and trip has slightly increased by 5%. So there's a slight increase, and that might be just because of all sorts of things, which we'll talk about. But the people reported missing or overdue has decreased since previous decades due to navigational errors, with a slight exception in 2020. And that might be, my working theory is that in 2020, we obviously had the end of lockdown. So there was lots of people going back into the mountains who hadn't been in the mountains for a year or two. And obviously there was an increase, or we think there was an increase in the number of people who are new to it, and they couldn't go on holidays, and they were keen to get out for their mental and physical well-being. So they were going in there. So maybe there was an increase because of kind of people not having been practiced, or maybe they didn't quite have the skills. But that's gone down a little bit last year. But the main thing is, it's just our slips, trips. The type of injuries, so when people are falling over, as you'd expect, the main thing is people are sprains and fractures. And I'm not sure how you can often tell what the difference between a sprain and a fracture is on the hill. Even if you go to GP, they will send you to the hospital because you need to x-ray it, unless you've got a bone sticking out and it's really obvious. But so if you just put those two together, 65% of people have had a sprain or a fracture. And as you'd expect, it's all to do with your ankle, knee, and lower leg, which is again 66%. So most people are having a lower leg injury. And that is probably to do with the fact that if you do something with your arm or your wrist or something, then you're pretty capable, if you want to get off the hill yourself. You can walk off the hill. Whereas if you have a lower leg injury, you can't get yourself off the hill. You need assistance, either from someone on the hill with you, but more likely mountain rescue. So that's why I think our statistics are skewed very much to the kind of lower leg injury, and again, sprains and fractures. Whereas if you look at the medical and kind of exposures and cuts and bruises, they're much lower because just less of it happening, but also people can get themselves off. If they've got a cut and bruise, they can usually get themselves off. So what do the stats show us? So what can we take from the stats? Although the number of are increasing for call-outs, the number of participants are also increasing, or so we think. But we don't know. We have no statistics to tell us how many people are going in the mountains, how many days they're spending there, how many hours of activity they're doing. So although the number of mountain rescue shouts are increasing by a certain percentage, if the number of people going in the hills is increasing 10%, and the number of mountain rescue shouts are increasing by 5%, then actually statistically we could be getting safer in the hills. But we just have no way of, at the moment, we have no way of telling how many people are going into the hills and having adventures, and how many days they're going in the hill every year, and things like that. And that's a really big question that, as part of my Mountaineering Scotland role, is to try and drill down. And we're going to start using surveys. There's hill counters and things, although there's limited things. But the big piece will be kind of using kind of metadata from search engines and people's kind of Google tracks and Strava accounts and things like that. So we can get an idea, and that's part of the job, but we'll never know exactly how many people, because a lot of people don't want to kind of track their walks on their phones. They quite like going out without doing that. But statistically, we're not quite sure. But the mobile phone coverage has increased, and we're not sure if this has increased the number of call-outs or whether this has decreased the number of call-outs. So it's kind of the unraveling of this relationship between the increase, have the number of call-outs increased because it's easier to call out mountain rescue. So as soon as it happens, or as soon as you know you got lost, you call out mountain rescue. Or have people's mobile phones made it easier to know where you are, and therefore there's potentially less call-outs than there might well have been for the number of people. That relationship is really, really tricky to work out, but it's definitely there. It's definitely increasing. So I've just put up a slide here with EE. They're the largest provider. Obviously, there are other providers available, but you can see how there's been a massive increase in coverage, phone coverage, from 2016 to 2020. And that will be increasing even more. So now we're going to put down the mountain rescue things, and we're going to look at the fatality. So when someone dies in the mountains, and this is a little bit easier to kind of capture in a way, because when someone dies in the mountains, when there's been a fatality, the police are involved. It's not kind of so there's two or three, as I said before, there's three teams that don't input their data into the SMR pot, if you like. But if someone dies in the mountains, it doesn't matter where in Scotland they die, then the police get to hear about it, and they find out why, where, how, and things like that as much as they possibly can. And Mountaineering Scotland have been collecting that information since 2013 to see if there's any patterns and things like that. What we do need to be careful of, or mindful of, is that because there's fatalities involved, there's a bit of kind of caution needed around what information is put out there. So the causes of fatalities, so looking at the numbers, 50% are people falling off the mountain, either down a steep slope and hurting themselves, or off cliffs, and that goes for summer and winter. But if you look at the statistics that we saw earlier on, the majority of call-outs are in the summer. So statistically, if you fall off in winter, you're more likely to die, unfortunately. And there's obviously other things that will cause problems in winter, which are avalanches. So 10% of fatalities in the mountains are avalanches. And hypothermia, you can obviously die of hypothermia and exposure in summer, but obviously it's much more prevalent in winter as well. So although there's less people in the hills and less call-outs in winter, it probably accounts for, well, it does account for more of the fatalities. And that can just be kind of the lack of, or the narrowing of the margin of error in winter. You're much less likely to get away with things in winter. Navigation's harder. If you have to stop because you've broken something and you can't get yourself off the hill, then you're much more likely to get hypothermia. There's snow issue with slipping and falling and stuff like that. So winter is just more hazardous. So that kind of does that. Demographics, so looking at age and gender and things like that. So this chart on the left, we've got Mountaineering Scotland fatalities. The majority, 92%, are male, and only 8% are female of the people that are dying in the mountains. Whereas the SMR statistics, the people asking for assistance in the mountains, so everyone who calls mountain rescue, it's much more 50-50, 55% male, 45% female. So people getting stuck in the mountains and needing assistance, it's gender-wise, it's about 50-50, not far off. But when it comes to fatalities in the mountains, the huge majority are male. And if you look at the age range, you've got fatalities. You've got a peak at kind of your late 20s and 30s, and then you've got another peak at your sort of 50s and 60s. But if you look at the age range of mountain rescue incidents, there's a big peak at sort of 25 to 35, and then it drops off again. And it's quite a sort of a thing to look at the 50 to 6-year-olds where there's that. So a way of trying to explain that is, are they getting back after a break? So are they the sort of the 50 to 6-year-olds kind of life gets in the way, they can't get onto the mountains as much as they would because they've got family, they've got jobs and things, but as they get older, family maybe grow up and leave, so there's less pressure on their time, so they're getting in the mountains more. But when they go back into the mountains, have they got skill fade? Have they got fitness fade? Maybe they're still thinking that their mindset is of a 20 to 30-year-old, but actually their body and their brain is working like a 50 to 60-year-old. So there's that disparity between the two. We're not quite sure. But it might be explained by the average ages. So the average age of a medical, so that is sort of heart attacks or something that potentially could have happened walking down the street or sitting at home. So heart attacks, strokes, things like that. The average age is sort of 61 and a half, whereas the average age of a trauma, so that's where something happened to them in the mountains and they got bashed, something that was sort of mountain specific, is 45 years old. And that's all ages. So male is 50 and the female is 41. So you're much more likely to die in your 50s as a male and much more likely to die at the age of 40 as a female. So being female and younger, you're more likely to die. And I suspect that is to do with the fact that if you look at the breakdown of the kind of medical side, so the 61-year-old averaging age, it's almost totally to do with men. So there are virtually no medical issues, fatalities for females, and they're all males. So that's probably why more men are dying in the mountains at an older age. But again, pinch of salt with that. So takeaway key notes on the statistics is winter falls lead to more fatalities. And winter introduces other significant risks besides the falls, so like avalanches and exposure, and the margin for error is much smaller. Comparatively few women die in the mountains. That's statistically shown. All mountain incidents, but are skewed by gender. So it's usually 50-50 for SMR stats, but men are definitely dying, whereas women are dying much less. And that's a big question, and probably do with some academic research into that area. The age distribution shown is life experience may not lead to safer outcomes. So the more you're in the mountains, it doesn't necessarily lead to safer outcomes. And that's potentially to do with some human factors. So I've sort of suggested a couple of human factors, but these are by far not the only ones. So it could be confirmation bias. So as we get older, it could be the tendency to give precedence to information that reinforces what they believe or what they want to believe to be true. So I've got some experience. I've been in the mountains for 20 or 30 years. This has always been the case. And I then use that as confirming my bias. It could be illusion of control, which is when an individual believes they can control uncontrollable events. They underestimate the risks. They persevere with failing strategies. So if you've not planned properly or you've always done it this way, you just kind of keep going with it and you think you can control it. So maybe you're in avalanche terrain and you've always walked on this slope, and you've done some avalanche education. So maybe you think you can control it. But of course, you can't control the avalanche. It happened or it's not. What you need to do is understand the risks and decide whether you want to take that risk or not. So you can't control if the avalanche is going to kick off or not. And the other one I've mentioned here is normalization of deviance, which is doing something you know to be wrong enough times that it becomes normal and accepted practice. So not carrying a first aid kit or a head torch, traveling in the considerable avalanche terrain, not wearing a helmet while skiing or scrambling, those sort of things. I've done it I've never worn a helmet, therefore nothing's ever happened, so it doesn't really matter. And then it becomes so normal that you break those rules. I say that in inverted commas, that you stop seeing the risks as being risks. And obviously, I've got skill fade, and does that fade with age? Your reactions, we know your reactions get less with age. Your fitness sometimes does, although I know some very, very fit, much fitter than me, sort of more elderly people. Depends what you do. But humans are humans, and by being a human, you make errors. So it doesn't matter how good you are, how aware of those human factors you are, you will absolutely make mistakes. It's just whether we get away with those. What's your margin of making those mistakes? Can you catch those mistakes early enough? And the most experienced mountaineers and hill walkers absolutely still need to call on mountain rescue. And we do. Again, the media often play on this idea that we're always going out for idiots on the hills. But that's not the case. We're often going out for experienced people who've just rolled their ankle. So, regulated spaces. So that was a little bit about mountain rescue. So I just put together, now a lot of your members, people listening, will know lots more about this than I do. You'll all have your kind of areas of expertise, but just as examples, if you're on the road, be a bike, horse, or a car, or a pedestrian, we've got the Road Traffic Act and lots of other things to do with roads. So that's a regulated space. There's rules, there's laws. We've got the International Regulation Prevention of Collisions at Sea. So again, if I'm on the water at sea, then there's rules. And this is just one example. There's hundreds of different regulations, international regulations about stopping people crashing into each other, stopping boats sinking and things like that. If you're in the air, then there's the Air Navigation Order. Again, there's UK-wide ones, European ones, global laws and regulations and stuff, because they don't want planes crashing into each other and getting in the way. And when we're at work, we've got the Management Health and Safety at Work regulations. We've got personal protective equipment regulations. We've got reporting of injuries and diseases, dangerous occurrences, so the RIDDOR things. And we've got working at heights. Again, there's hundreds and hundreds of more, but they're just examples. So whatever we do, wherever we go, we have regulations, particularly in our workplace, about what we can and can't do. But importantly, RIDDOR, if you get something wrong or have any amiss, by law you have to kind of report it, which is quite useful for when we look at statistics in the workplace. They're usually much better than the Scottish Mountain Rescue ones, for instance. So that's some things we need to think about. So what have we got in the mountains? Yeah. Should we have rules and regulations for the mountains? Will that make us all safer? So that's the next few slides. So should we regulate the mountains, and what regulations do we have at the moment? So here's an example. The media love it. We've got someone walking up Ben Nevis Path with their flip-flops on. It's a lovely sunny day by the looks of it. And this has been reported by the Daily Mail. And obviously it gets social media love it as well. There's lots and lots of people go on and kind of criticize people and stuff. So should this person be allowed? Now, if this was someone on a work site, and this was a work site, they would be absolutely taken off the work site, told to go home and get their proper personal protection equipment. And there'd be rules, and there'd be a site manager dealing with that. Yeah, but it's not work, so they can. And also, who decides on what's acceptable risk? So this person here, Dave McLeod, a very famous, internationally famous climber. This person here, Dave McLeod, is climbing up the north face of Ben Nevis on a famous kind of thing, and he's not using any ropes. He's just using ice axes and crampons, and he's halfway up a big, massive ice cliff. Yeah. So should that person be allowed to do it? Should Dave McLeod be allowed to solo there? Because in a workplace, that's working at heights. So they would have to be attached to 2 ropes and lots of other things, or there'd be fence around them or various other things. But this person is doing that. So should they be allowed to do that? So rules and regulations. for the mountains. We have very little. We have in Scotland, now, if you're listening from outside of Scotland, then it is a bit different. We've got the Land Reform Act Scotland 2003, which introduced new rights and responsibilities for public access to land and the countryside. These don't include. This doesn't include places such as people's gardens and work sites and things. But if you see a hill or a mountain or a forest or a lake or a beach in Scotland, then legally you have the right to access that. And that is amazing. It means you can park your car and go, wow, look at that mountain. I'm just going to go up there. And then it's up to you whether you go up there or not. However, your behaviour is outlined, how you have to behave is outlined in the Scottish Outdoor Access Code. So that is, know the code before you go, and you can go onto the website outdooraccessscotland.scot, and that absolutely blows people's minds for what people from abroad, from down in England, if they're not used to the access laws, they go, what, I can just walk anywhere? Yeah, you can, but you just need to be responsible, and you're responsible for your behaviour, and you're also responsible for your own risks. Because people are like, oh, but what if I walk across a farmer's field, and break my leg, or climb over a fence? Well, we've still got a duty of care. So if the farmer or the landowner has something that causes harm to someone, then that comes under same rules of duty of care like everywhere in life. But if you fall off a cliff that you're rock climbing, and that cliff was owned by someone, doesn't matter who it was, then I was rock climbing. I chose to make that things. So that comes under Valenti non fit injurer, which is the willing man. Apologies, this is just what it says in law. So a willing person cannot be injured. This is a very old common law principle. It was passed in the Defence and Occupiers Liability Act in 1957, which means there's no obligation on landowners or occupiers to visit who are willing. So if you go there, you are willingly accepting those risks, which is kind of means if I fall off the mountain, doesn't matter who owned the mountain, I chose to be there and I made that decision to do that. So we have some of the most unrestricted laws in the whole of the world, but this isn't the case in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. You'd have to check those ones out. So you'd have to stick to footpaths or open access ground and stuff. But with greater power comes greater responsibilities. So RIDDOR, I mentioned before, you have to report under RIDDOR in your workplace. But interestingly, if you take 2019 for both SMR statistics and non-fatal work incidents, if you look there, slips, trips, and falls, and by falls, I mean kind of falling over, not falling off from heights, because that's the 8% on the right-hand side there. So if you just do slips, trips, and falling over, then that both of them, interestingly, account for 20, sort of top end of 20, 27 and 29 respectively, for mountain rescue in Scotland and RIDDOR across the UK. So very, very similar, and I thought it was quite interesting. Would regulations, so on the right-hand side, we've got highly regulated workspaces, and they're having 29% of the accidents are just for slip, trips, and falling over. But then on the left-hand side, we've got virtually no regulation. No one saying what you can and can't wear, where you can go and where you can't go. But we've still got high end of 20, nearly 30% of slips, trips, and falls. So would adding regulation change that? I would argue it wouldn't. But people, obviously, I'm comparing a little bit of apples and pears, but I just thought it was quite an interesting statistic. Now, kind of the crux of the matter, the argument. Often people they want more regulation. People who don't understand or don't do mountain rescue or mountaineering, they go, oh, people shouldn't be allowed in the mountains, especially when you get high media attention on a particular mountain rescue shout. They go, people shouldn't be allowed. People should have to have insurance. People should have qualifications before they can go out. Well, the mountaineering community, mountain rescue of Scotland and Mountaineering Scotland, the organisation that I work for, are dead against any form of that. And these are the arguments for that. Is we don't want to see signs and barriers on the mountains. It'd just be impractical. Imagine every kind of steep slope or cliff or dangerous area having a sign like they would have in the workspace. It would be impractical. Who would maintain that? And we don't go out in the Scottish Highlands in the mountains and the rivers and the beaches to see thousands of signs. We go out because there isn't all that, I would argue. We can't make the space safe by putting the barriers there. We don't want those rules and regulations. Part of the joy of going out in the mountains is that it's getting away from our day-to-day daily life of kind of society controlling what we can do, the risks we can take, where we can go. Humans like that kind of autonomy, that freedom to be able to make those things. So who would police it? So if you'd said, okay, you can only go out if you're qualified, well, who would police that? Who would decide what the levels were and things like that? And who would decide whether those risks are acceptable? So is that lady walking up the hill taking a greater or lesser risk in her flip-flops as Dave McLeod was free climbing that sort of mountain on that Ben Nevis ice fall? Who's taking more risks? Well, it depends, doesn't it? It depends on the skill level and the preparation involved. So we very much talk about changing the people, not the place. So we can look at trying to get people to understand and accept the level of risk. If you're going out into the mountains, then you need to understand and accept the risks, and you can mitigate against unwanted risks. Because some people like to go out in the mountains, but they don't like the risk. They don't want the risk. They enjoy hill walking for different reasons. Other people like taking a bit of risk, but they need to understand it. And we do that through planning, through knowledge, skills, and appropriate equipment. And it's about educating people through those things and upskilling people rather than changing the landscape and trying to manage it through signs and fences and things like that. So we use we've got something called the Be Avalanche Aware, which was a leaflet and is now an app. So these are examples of what we're doing. We've got the Be Avalanche Aware process, and that is giving people a process of, so if I'm going to go out to the hills and the mountains and go on my adventures, what do I need to do before? What do I need to do during my journey? And what do I need to do at kind of key places, they call it. And this was developed to give people a process when they go out to try and avoid avalanches. But it very, very much can be used for any adventures, be that kayaking or sea kayaking or sailing. And it's basically a process of thinking about the hazards, so the avalanche hazard of the weather conditions or the sea state if you're on the sea. Thinking about the people, that's me and the people I'm with, and maybe the people around me, and also thinking about the landscape. So all those things. So when I'm planning that. And then I think on my journey, I do the same, and then at key places. So it gives people very much a process. And then people are using phones more. So there was sort of spate, certainly in the media, about an awareness of people getting rescued because they were using their phone for navigating, and then their phone would get wet or die, and they only had a phone. So we were starting to put out information about using your phone. If you choose to use your phone, what kind of things you can do to protect it. So make sure it's charged, protect it from the weather, make sure the maps are downloaded so you're not relying on data, because obviously you can walk into no data areas, and extending your battery life and not having a backup. So if your phone does die, you drop or it breaks, you've got another way of navigating, be that a GPS unit or ideally a map and a compass and knowing how to use it. We run skills courses. So Mountaineering Scotland run skills courses in summer and winter and night navigation. You can hire guides and instructors. There's outdoor centres that will do those things as well. So there's lots of options for people. There is a mountain guide called James Thacker who runs Mountain Assurance, and he's put together, I really like this. It's kind of he's called it CHASM. C for communication, A for alter command gradient, S for situational awareness, and M for minimizing distraction. He's put this together for the kind of professional mountaineer, so people are instructing and guiding. But I actually think it's very useful for when people are on their journey to try and reduce those human factors of confirmation bias, illusion of control, and normalization of deviance and any other human factors. And it's a way of trying to reduce those human factors when you're out and about. We do kind of social media campaigns like Think Winter. So again, trying to educate people, trying to give them the information, show them and signpost them where the information is. So before you go out, I need to think winter. What do we need to do? So I'd check the avalanche forecast. Where can I do that? So you've got avalanche information service. I need to check the mountain weather service, which is, it's quite important. We often get people who don't realize that the weather in the valley might be very different to the weather on the top of the mountain. So in the UK and a lot of places in Europe, we've got specific mountain weather forecasts, which is fantastic. You can go straight to your phone. So there's really no excuses. But people need to know to check these things. And that's the key. You need to educate people on doing that. So that's what we're doing about it. But things do happen. And the riddle, when you have a near miss at work, you have to, by law, report it. We don't have that in the mountains. It would be amazing if you had a near miss or an accident, if it was by law, you had to kind of inform someone about it. But we do have voluntary near miss reporting. So in Scotland, you can report it on our website from Mountaineering Scotland, which is the website at the top left-hand corner there. And this is an example. So this is an example from someone who's reported something on our website, and it is in the mountain rescue area of Arica, which is the mountain rescue team I'm part of. And it's at the top of the Rest to Be Thankful, this particular mountain, Ben and Lochan. It's not a Munro. It's just shy of a Munro, so it's 901 meters high. And this particular ridge goes up the northeast ridge, and there's a sort of a bad step. And this bad step is where the path crosses at 750 meters ish. The path crosses close to the edge of a cliff, about 10-15 meters from the edge. So you're not right next to it. But it has resulted in the last sort of 10-20 years, it's resulted in about 7 call outs to this very specific spot. And unfortunately, most of those have been fatalities. And what's happened is in certain conditions in the winter, the ridge can be snow and ice free for most of it. But at this one part, snow collects and the ice collects and it becomes quite firm, and the path crosses this. So you can walk up with no ice axe and crampons. Quite often people have them in their bag or on their shoulder, and they look at this one particular spot, and it must be no more than 100 meters in length of this snowy patch, and they go, oh, and this is where the human factors kick in. I'll just cross this quickly. I won't bother putting my ice axe in my hand or put my crampons on. I'll just quickly pop across, because then there's no more snow after that. And the amount of times that someone slips at that one bit and then they can't stop in time and they go over the edge and then go down a cliff and end up on these boulders. And sometimes they go across it on the way up and they get away with it, and they come down, they get to the top, they come down, and it's that kind of normalization deviance. Well, I got across it fine before without my ice axe and crampons, and I'll just pop across it on the way down and it'll be all right. And the problem with downhill is it's a lot easier to kind of lose your footing on the way downhill. So that normalization deviance of I got away with it last time, I'll try it again. So we can do this and we can come a cropper. And again, because it's winter, things can change very quickly. So we want people to learn from mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself. So I like that quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. It's very true. So we need to learn from our mistakes. Hopefully we don't do too many, but the most important thing is we're learning from everyone else's mistakes. So what the BMC and the Mountaineering Scotland have joined them. So is you can report your near misses and the incidents on the BMC website, and also through Mountaineering Scotland website. And also, we also want to hear about mountain incidents. So if you've been rescued by a rescue team or someone else in the mountains, so something's happened and you've been rescued, we want to hear about what happened. And this is quite interesting because all the information and all the statistics we have are from the perspective of the mountain rescue teams, but no one's ever asked the people who were rescued what they think led up to the incident. So again, as a team leader, I fill in the statistics and I think, oh, well, that was because they didn't have a head torch, or they obviously got lost, so they can't navigate. But actually asking the people who got rescued, what we're doing is start collecting their stories, starting to understand the human aspect about why they needed to rescue from the people who were rescued rather than the people who were rescuing. So that's my talk, and I'm going to bring myself back in. I'm not sure how this works, but that is the end of my presentation. So if you've got any questions, then I eagerly await the questions. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Ross, for a very, very informative presentation. Now for the questions and answers, we are welcome to accept any on Q&A section, or if you like to be unmuted, we can allow you to talk. Let's have a look at some questions. Okay, there's just a Stuart said, thank you, Ross, a great presentation.
My pleasure.
There's one question that came through, Ross. I'm just going to read it out for you. As a mountain rescue team, and this is from Tony, sorry. As a mountain rescue team, would you have a guide as to the distance a base may be from a possible rescue location?
Ooh, good question. It can be anywhere. So different team areas. So every mountain rescue team has kind of an area. So Arica, obviously, we cover the Arica Alps and all the sort of the Bridge of Orkney Hills. So in our particular area for Arica, we can be from driving from away from the base up to the Bridge of Orkney Hills, and that can be sort of 45 minutes, 40 minutes. But further north, you've got the population area is much more spread out. So it can take them an hour or two for them to drive to their base, and then it can take 2 or 3 hours to drive to that mountain. So it can completely vary depending where you are. And I know some of the Lake District teams are very, very close to, and the English teams are very close to their area. So I can't give a number. It depends how remote your mountain is. But it can be several hours depending on where in Scotland you are.
Okay. The second question from Tony is, what is the maximum distance a drone will fly from an operator during a rescue operation when this can be used?
So they're governed by the rules, the aviation rules, so they can only fly within sight. So they have to be able to visually see where they are. They have to be able to see their drone at all times. So they can't sit at the base, for instance, and fly their drone into the mountains and then just use their headset to see where they're looking at. By law, by the rules, they have to see that. So they'd have to either walk up the mountain with their drone and then fly it from there, but they have to be able to see it. I'm not a drone pilot, so I probably can't give you as much detail as someone who can fly, but it has to be visually. So you're talking a couple of 100 meters, because any more than that, they're quite small and it gets hard to see them. So maybe 500 meters, I'm guessing, but I'm guessing that one.
Okay. Tony said thank you for both of the answers.
Pleasure.
There's a question from Norbert. It said, what is the thoughts on walkers, etc., having personal insurance in the event of a rescue?
I was expecting this question. It comes up all the time, and it's an interesting question. It's kind of like a knee-jerk reaction in the media and people on social media is, so first thing is all mountain rescue teams are voluntary. So we do it because we are mountaineers and hill walkers ourselves, and we see the need to support our community. And we recognize that it doesn't matter how good you are, at some point you might need rescuing. And you could be the world's best mountaineer and you can still have an accident. And we, as mountaineers ourselves, want to support that. The other thing is, if you take the case, because people say, oh, but if I drive a car, I've got to have insurance. If I go on and do things in my workplace, I've got to have insurance. Though that insurance is to cover you for damage to either property or to people, that doesn't cover you the cost of rescue. So if I'm driving my car and I crash my car, I don't need insurance to get cut out of my car and rescued by the ambulance and the fire brigade. What it's doing is it's covering me for any damages. So people have insurance or are able to get, and being part of BMC and part of Mountaineering Scotland, they get personal liability insurance. So if I cause an accident on the hill and hurt someone, or hurt or damage property through my actions, then I am insured by being a member of this organization. But that insurance doesn't cover me the cost of being rescued, because it's the same as driving a car or falling over in the street. You don't need insurance for that because my taxes cover that. And I would argue that that's the same thing. So if we look at it, we don't have insurance because we don't need insurance for rescue, because the police and the ambulance and everyone else will rescue me through my taxes. And it's the same in France as well, and other countries abroad, but not all countries. So some countries you definitely do need insurance. So hopefully that answers the UK perspective.
Okay, he just Norbert just added insurance. It does raise the point of ensuring the guide you pay for the insured and regulated.
Yeah, so that's quite specific, is because that guide is working, and that again, but that insurance covers them not legally, that covers them for liability. So if they're working, they could get sued through that sort of duty of care and that extended duty of care. So if I'm guiding someone and I damage them through my own kind of actions, then they could sue me, and that insurance as a guide would be because I've done something wrong at my workplace. But it wouldn't be to cover me to be rescued.
Thank you, Ross. There's another question from Frank. He wants to know if there is a civil air patrol involving volunteer pilots. Somebody mentioned it to him, so he wants to know if this is accurate.
Ooh, I can't answer that question. I'm afraid that is beyond my knowledge. It's not something I've heard of. I sort of specialize in mountaineering and mountain rescue. I've not heard of a civil aviation rescue service or anything like that. I think that's, yeah. Is that for pilots to rescue other pilots, or is that to pilots to help with rescuing people in the mountains? I'm not quite sure, but I don't know anything about it. I've not heard of it. I'll maybe Google that later.
Okay, that's great. I don't think there's any more questions. Yeah, we can always send questions over to you, Ross, after the meeting has finished. If you like any questions to be answered, we're happy to liaise with Ross, which he can provide the answers.
Yeah.
Just before we go, sorry, Frank just commented and said they can be called in the police, but they're probably for missing person, lowland missing persons.
Right. Okay. So that's for searching for. Yeah, that makes sense. But as I say, I don't know much about that, and I will from here I will Google and have a things. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and hopefully it was informative. And as it was said, if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them via email after this.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank
Ross,
you.
and thank you everyone for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.